Day 1. She didn't name him. Naming things made them harder to lose. Billo and Virek stood in the corridor of the Cedar Hollow Animal Shelter on a Thursday morning in late January, holding a stack of folded cotton remnants against her chest, the way another person might hold a briefcase, with the habit of someone who has carried the same thing to the same place so many times that the object and the person have arranged themselves around each other. The fabric smelled of the mild, unscented soap she used at home. She had read somewhere that familiar smells could reduce stress in shelter animals. She had not told anyone at the shelter this. She had simply started bringing the folded squares 6 months ago and left them in the enclosures without explanation. She did not explain things with words. She had not for 11 years. The stroke had come at 54 on a Tuesday afternoon in her kitchen while she was making tea. It had taken the movement from her right hand for 8 months, and it had taken her voice entirely. The voice did not come back. The hand eventually did, enough for the careful, practiced work of her quilting, the measured cuts, the long, straight seams, the intricate geometry of pattern that she had been building since her 30s, and that now filled her small house on Alderton Street with quiet purpose. Her hands still knew what to do. Her throat had simply renegotiated its terms with the world, and the world eventually had renegotiated back. She communicated in written notes, in gestures, in the particular quality of stillness that people who have lost one language develop in its place, a way of being present that carries more information than most words do. Her neighbor Patrice understood her well enough to finish her sentences. The grocery clerks on Maple Avenue knew her order. The volunteers at the shelter, she had been coming for nearly a year now, had learned by degrees not to fill her silences with their own. Most of them. The corridor smelled of antiseptic and kibble, and underneath both, the warm animal smell that she had grown to find not unpleasant. She passed the front room, where the socialized cats sat in their open-topped pens and reached for visitors with cooperative enthusiasm. She walked further, toward the back, where the enclosures were walled on 3 sides, and the cats inside them had their own reasons for being there that did not include performing for strangers. She stopped at bay 14. The card on the door read, Riven, male approx, 4 years, domestic short hair, brown tabby. Note, not suitable for handling by general public. Staff only beyond this point. The note was new. She had noticed over the last 2 weeks that the laminated card had been reprinted 3 times, each version slightly more emphatic than the last. Riven was at the back of the enclosure, pressed into the angle where the rear wall met the side panel. He was not crouching in the posture of a frightened animal. He was positioned with a kind of compressed readiness, like something coiled rather than cowering, a distinction that Elowen, who had been watching him for 3 weeks now, had come to think mattered. He was not afraid of the enclosure. He was managing his relationship with everything outside it. His eyes found her. He did not move. She set one of the folded fabric squares on the pass-through shelf at the bottom of the door, the slot designed for food dishes, and sat down on the metal bench across the corridor. The bench was cold through her coat. She settled her hands in her lap and looked at him. He looked back. This was what she had been doing for 3 weeks. Sitting, looking, not approaching, not reaching, not making sounds. The bench was far enough that she was outside what the shelter literature called his threshold, the distance at which he shifted from watchful to reactive. She had established this through careful, unhurried observation, moving the bench slightly one way or the other until she found the exact position where his body, while not relaxed, was not braced either. 3 weeks, and he had not attacked from behind the door. He had not hidden. He had not, as he did with almost everyone else who passed the corridor, hurled himself at the mesh with the explosive force that had earned him the reprinted card. He had looked at her. She looked at him. After 40 minutes, she stood up, gathered her bag, and walked back down the corridor. At the corner, she paused as she always did, and looked back. Riven was still at the back of the enclosure. His body had not moved, but his eyes were still on the corridor where she had been. She noted this on her small notepad on the bus ride home, in the neat, compressed handwriting she had developed since the stroke, smaller than her old script, more precise, as if losing one form of communication had sharpened her investment in the others. Day 21. He watched the empty corridor for at least 30 seconds after I left. She closed the notepad and looked out the bus window at Cedar Hollow passing by, the bare trees along the main road, the January light coming in low and white off the snow, the smoke from chimneys rising straight in the still air. Michigan in January was not subtle about itself. It committed to winter the way it committed to everything, fully, without apology, for as long as it decided was necessary. She thought about what she had seen, not with sentiment, with precision. He watched where she had been. That was not nothing. 1 week later, the shelter coordinator was named Maris Kellen, and she had the particular manner of someone who has spent enough years working with difficult animals to have acquired, by absorption, some of their qualities. She was direct. She did not waste energy on displays. And she was, Elowen had come to understand, genuinely and protectively fond of Riven, in the way that people sometimes become fond of the things that test them most severely. Maris caught up with Elowen in the corridor on a Tuesday morning. She was carrying a clipboard and the expression of someone about to say something they had been deciding whether to say for a while. She stopped in front of Elowen and looked at her without preamble. "He's been calmer since you started coming," she said. "I want you to know that. The staff have noticed." Elowen took out her notepad, wrote, "How long does the calm last after I leave?" Maris read it, pressed her lips together. "Maybe an hour. Sometimes 2. Then he cycles back." She paused. "He bit a volunteer last week. The woman was reaching in to refresh his water, same as always. He gave no warning signs." Elowen wrote, "Had anything changed in the environment that day?" Maris blinked. "There was a new intake. Young dog, 3 bays down, noisy. We don't usually put dogs on this corridor." Elowen wrote, "He anticipates." He was already activated when she came in. Maris was quiet for a moment. She looked at Elowen with the attention of someone recalibrating something. "That's what our behaviorist said," she finally told her. Word for word, essentially. Elowen wrote nothing further. She tucked the notepad away and looked at the door of Bay 14, where Riven was visible through the mesh, sitting upright now, his eyes already on her from across the corridor. Maris watched this. "He sees you differently," Maris said. "I can't explain it any better than that." Elowen sat down on the bench. Riven sat in the back of the enclosure and watched her. The corridor was quiet, except for the distant sound of the shelter's larger population, the muffled barking from the dog wing, the clatter of a food dish somewhere, the low mechanical hum of the climate system overhead. These sounds did not alter Riven's attention. His eyes did not flick toward the sounds and back, the way an unsettled animal's would. They stayed on Elowen with the quality of something making a sustained decision. She stayed for 45 minutes. When she stood to leave, she placed the second folded fabric square on the pass-through shelf. Light blue cotton, washed several times, carrying the specific smell of her soap. Riven did not approach the shelf while she was there. She did not expect him to. Day 38. The fabric square was at the front of the enclosure, not the back. Elowen noticed this the moment she rounded the corner. She slowed, stopped 3 feet further than her usual bench position, and looked. Riven had moved the square. It was wedged against the bottom corner of the door, directly in front of his food dish. He was sitting beside it, not on top of it, not carrying it, but beside it, in the exact position he occupied when he was most settled. She sat down. He looked at her. Then he looked at the square beside him, then back at her. The corridor was empty, no other volunteers, just the ambient sounds of the shelter and the January light coming through the high window at the far end, making a pale rectangle on the concrete floor. She watched him for a long time. He did not touch the square again. He did not need to. Whatever had needed to be communicated had been communicated in the repositioning, in the deliberate act of moving the object from where she had left it to where he wanted it to be. She wrote in her notepad on the bus home, "He put the fabric near his food. He is associating the smell with something safe. He moved it himself." She looked at what she had written. Then, below it, she wrote a second line. "This is new." That's he. Day 41. The volunteer. His name was Calder Reese, and he was 26 years old and had been volunteering at the shelter for 3 months with the specific energy of a person who is good at most things and has not yet learned that some problems are not susceptible to goodness alone. He was not a bad person. He was, in fact, quite a good one, organized, consistent, willing to stay late and clean enclosures that other volunteers found discouraging. He had watched Elowen's progress with Riven from a careful distance and had concluded, reasonably if incorrectly, that he now understood what she was doing. On a Wednesday morning when Elowen was not scheduled, Calder carried a folding chair to Bay 14. He positioned it where her bench usually sat. He sat down. He placed his hands in his lap. He waited. He had the posture right. He had the distance right. He had done his best with the stillness, though stillness did not come naturally to him, and his hands, despite his efforts, kept finding small movements to make, adjusting the hem of his sleeve, repositioning on the chair. Riven read all of this in approximately 4 seconds. The attack, when it came, was through the mesh door, which Calder had approached in the final minute to slide in a treat. He left with a gash across the back of his right hand, 2 parallel lines that were not deep, but were definitive. The water bowl was on its side. The fabric square was against the far wall. Riven was at the back of the enclosure. He did not move for the rest of the day. Maris called Elowen that evening. Elowen read the text, standing at her kitchen window where the blue light of early dark was settling over the yard and the cedar at the fence had dropped another arm of snow onto the path below it. She wrote back, "How is Calder?" Maris replied, "Hand cleaned and bandaged. He's okay. He's embarrassed, more than hurt." Then after a pause, "I need to tell you something, Elowen. If there is another incident like this, I have to consider isolation. Permanent separation from the adoption floor. That path doesn't end well." Elowen stood at her window for a long time. The text stayed on the screen. She wrote back, "I understand. I'll come tomorrow." The next morning, Riven was at the far back corner. He had been there, Maris told her, since the previous afternoon. He had not eaten. He had turned his body in toward the wall, not hiding exactly, but oriented away from the corridor in the specific posture of something that has been hurt by its own hope and is not yet willing to renegotiate. Elowen sat on the bench. She did not move it closer. She did not call to him or make sounds. She opened her bag and took out the quilting she had brought, a small project, a 9-patch block she had been assembling from a collection of cotton prints in autumn colors. She had not planned to bring work, but her hands had reached for it on the way out the door without consulting her, and she had let them. She worked on the quilting in the corridor. The sounds she made were small and specific, the soft friction of fabric against fabric, the occasional brief snip of her small scissors, the whisper of thread being drawn through. Not loud, not irregular. A quiet, rhythmic set of sounds with no surprise in them. After 20 minutes, Riven turned his head, not toward her, toward the sounds. He remained at the back of the enclosure, but his body had shifted. The compressed away-facing posture had loosened slightly. His ears, which had been flat, were upright now. After 30 minutes, he moved 2 feet toward the front of the enclosure. He stopped. He did not look at her directly. He looked at a point on the floor of his enclosure, about a foot in front of him, in the way animals look when they are processing information that is not primarily visual. She kept working. After 40 minutes, he was at the door. He did not touch the mesh. He stood at the door of the enclosure and looked at her, not with the forward-leaning readiness that preceded an attack, but with something else. Something that had more still water in it than that. She looked up from the quilt and met his eyes. Neither of them moved. She looked back down at her work and made 3 more stitches, very slowly. When she looked up again, he was sitting at the door of his enclosure, sitting with his weight settled and his tail wrapped once around his front feet, looking at her with the particular quality of an animal that is no longer performing assessment and has passed, without announcement, into something simpler. She put the quilting away. She placed a fresh fabric square on the pass-through shelf. She stood and walked out. She did not look back this time. Some moments required the dignity of not being watched. 2 weeks later, February. He was coming to the front of the enclosure on his own now. Not all the way, not every time, but consistently enough that Maris had noted it in the behavioral log with the careful language of someone who does not want to overstate a thing before it has finished happening. Subject demonstrates reduced arousal during visits by regular volunteer. Approaches door voluntarily in approximately 60% of sessions. Duration of approach increasing. Elowen brought the quilting every time. She had started a new block, the same autumn colors, different arrangement. The sounds she made were the same sounds, in the same rhythm, producing the same quality of small, predictable noise that Riven had apparently decided to file under known and therefore safe. On a Tuesday, something happened that had not happened before. She was working on the quilt. He was at the door, and he began to move, not toward her, but toward the pass-through shelf where the fabric square sat, the one she had placed that morning. He lowered his head. He pressed the side of his face against the cotton. She went very still. He pressed the other side of his face against it, once, twice. Then he sat back and looked at her. She did not react. She gave it 10 seconds. Then she looked back down at the quilt and made the next stitch. This was, she had come to understand, the only appropriate response to a moment of trust, to treat it as unremarkable, to let it exist without ceremony, without reward, without the human urgency to confirm and celebrate that so often frightened the exact thing it was trying to honor. In the corridor, a small girl appeared beside her father, who had stopped at the door of the room with a question for a passing volunteer. The girl was perhaps 8, wearing a purple coat, and she stared at Riven with the frank and total attention of a child for whom the world is still primarily interesting. Riven saw the child. His body went still. Not the compressed, activated stillness that preceded reaction. Different. He stayed at the door and looked at her with the same level assessment he gave everything new. The child said to her father in a loud whisper, "That one's not hiding." Her father shushed her. The child glanced at Elowen on the bench. "Is that your cat?" Elowen shook her head. "Does he like you?" She considered this. Then she tilted her head in a gesture that the child, who was apparently very good at reading non-verbal communication, interpreted correctly. "Kind of," the child said. Elowen held her thumb and forefinger about an inch apart. The girl smiled with the considerable delight of someone who has been let in on something. Her father moved them along. Riven watched them go. Then he looked back at Elowen. He sat down again at the door. Maris, who had been passing the corridor and had witnessed this from a distance, did not say anything. She wrote in the log later that evening, "Subject showed no reactive behavior in response to child visitor. Maintained position at door throughout interaction. Returned attention to regular volunteer immediately after." And then, below the formal entry, in handwriting slightly different from the official notation, "I don't know what she's doing, but it's working." Late February. The absence. On a Monday, Elowen did not come. On Tuesday, she did not come. By Friday, when the regular volunteers had settled into the rhythm of their shifts, the absence had become a presence of its own, a different shape in the corridor, a notable gap in the pattern that had been building for nearly 6 weeks. Riven had gone to the back of his enclosure on Monday afternoon. By Wednesday, he had stopped eating at his regular time. Not refusing food entirely, he came to it eventually, late, after the corridor had been empty for hours, but the routine had dissolved. The behavioral log recorded this without interpretation, because that was what behavioral logs did, but Maris, reading it, pressed one hand briefly over her mouth and then went to check on him herself. He was at the back corner. His body was not turned toward the wall. He was facing the door of the enclosure, but he was as far from it as he could get. "I know," Maris said softly. He did not look at her. She replaced his water dish and left. On Saturday, his intake form was reviewed for the first time in 2 months. The box marked adoption candidate had been changed cautiously to a provisional yes. Maris had done this herself, quietly, after the second week of consistent door approaching. She now looked at the form and turned it face down on her desk without changing anything. She waited. On Monday, day 8 of the absence, she called the number she had for Elowen. The call went to the voicemail of Patrice, Elowen's neighbor, and listed emergency contact. Patrice called back within an hour. She was measured and warm and explained, in the direct way of someone who has been a close friend for a long time, that Elowen had been in the hospital since the previous Sunday. A minor procedure, something that had been scheduled and then postponed and then scheduled again, and that had finally happened, and everything had gone as it was supposed to, but recovery was taking a little longer than anticipated, and she would be home by the end of the week. Maris thanked her. She hung up and sat at her desk, and looked out the small window at the shelter's parking lot, where someone was loading a crate into a car with the careful, pleased movements of a person whose day had gone well. She wrote in the log, "Volunteer absence due to medical procedure. Anticipated return, end of week." She did not write what she was thinking, which was, "Get here. He needs the pattern back." The return, a Thursday in early March. Elowen came through the shelter door at 9:17 in the morning, which was later than her usual arrival time and slower than her usual pace. Her coat was a different one than she had been wearing, heavier with a wool collar, and she had a new scarf at her throat, pale green, the kind of color that belongs to early spring. Her hands, when she set her bag on the volunteer check-in desk, moved with the slight deliberateness of someone who has been still for too long and is reclaiming the ordinary territory of motion. Calder Reese was at the desk. His right hand had healed. He stood up straighter when she came in and started to say something. She could see it assembling itself on his face, and then appeared to think better of it and simply said, "Good morning." She nodded. She picked up her bag and walked toward the back corridor. She stopped at bay 14. Riven was at the far corner. Same position as the day after Calder's incident. Same turned-away orientation. She sat down on the bench, took out her quilting. The autumn-colored block she had been working on was nearly finished. She set it in her lap and made the first stitch of the morning. The small, familiar sounds moved into the corridor's air. 5 minutes passed. 10. At 12 minutes, Riven's ear turned. The right one, swiveling back toward the corridor. At 15 minutes, he shifted his weight. At 20 minutes, he stood. He walked from the far corner of the enclosure to the door, not quickly, not in the compressed, braced way that preceded anything aggressive. He walked the length of his enclosure with the measured pace of a creature that knows exactly where it is going and has decided, after consideration, to go there. He reached the door. He looked at her. She looked up from the quilting, met his eyes for 2 seconds, looked back down. He sat. He stayed at the door for the remainder of the session, 45 minutes, without moving from that position. When she finally packed the quilting away and stood to leave, she placed a fresh square on the pass-through shelf. Pale green cotton, the same color as the new scarf. Whether this was intentional on her part, nobody could have said with certainty. What was certain was that when Maris walked past the bay 30 minutes later, the fabric square was at the front of the enclosure, near the door, pressed against the same corner where Riven now sat. He was not hiding. He was waiting. Maris updated the behavioral log. She changed the intake form back. Adoption candidate, yes. She wrote it without the qualifier this time. Mid-March. The toy. The children from Birchwood Elementary had been coming every few weeks, part of a program the shelter had developed with a nearby school. Nothing structured, just a guided walkthrough for the purpose of teaching children that shelters were not sad places, but working ones, and that the animals inside them had histories worth understanding. One Thursday, a group of 9-year-olds had spent 30 minutes making enrichment toys in the shelter's small craft room, simple constructions of fabric scraps and stuffing and string, shaped loosely like mice or birds or nothing in particular, depending on the child. The teacher collected them, and the staff distributed them through the enclosures over the following week. Riven's arrived on a Tuesday. It was a small mouse shape, crudely but earnestly made, sewn with large irregular stitches in a contrasting thread. The child who had made it had used brown and cream cotton for the body. The brown and cream cotton was the same fabric as the quilting squares Elowen brought. This was coincidence. The children had been given scraps from the shelter's donation bin, and those scraps had come, in part, from a bag of fabric ends Elowen had brought in 2 months earlier. The overlap in materials was accidental in the most complete sense of the word. Riven did not know this. What he knew was this. Something had appeared in his enclosure that smelled with a specificity that no human in the corridor could have detected, like the fabric squares that had been appearing at his door for months. Like the particular soap smell he had organized a significant portion of his recent world around. He did not attack the toy. He did not flee from it. He walked up to it, pressed his face against it once, in the same way he had pressed his face against the fabric squares, and then carried it in his mouth to the corner of the enclosure nearest the door. He set it down. He lay down beside it. He stayed there. When Elowen arrived on Thursday, she saw this immediately. The toy was in the corner. Riven was beside it, in the position he now held when she was present, not at the very front of the enclosure, but not at the back. The middle ground he had established as his own. She sat on the bench. He looked at her. Then he stood, walked to the pass-through shelf, and sat directly in front of the slot. She had never seen him do this. He had always been at the door, or at the back, or somewhere in between. He had never positioned himself at the pass-through slot, the small opening designed for food dishes, set low in the door, at floor level. She looked at him. He looked at the slot. She reached into her bag. She took out a fabric square. She pushed it halfway through the slot, so that half extended into the enclosure and half remained on the corridor side. Riven looked at the extending fabric. He lowered his head. He pressed the side of his face against the half inside the enclosure, once, deliberately, and then he put his paw on it and drew it all the way through. He carried it to the corner with the toy. He lay back down. In the corridor, someone else had stopped without Elowen noticing, Calder, who had come around the corner with a supply bag and had frozen at the sight of what he was witnessing. He stood very still for 10 seconds. Then he backed up slowly, the way a person backs away from something they do not want to disturb, and went the long way around to his next task. He told Maris about it at the end of the shift. She listened without interrupting. "His paw was through the slot?" she asked. "For about 3 seconds, just long enough to pull it in." Maris was quiet. "No reaction? No tension?" "He looked like he was." Calder paused, searching for the right word. "Doing an errand." Maris picked up the behavioral log. She wrote for a longer time than she usually wrote. Then she set the pen down and looked at Calder. "When did you last doubt this was going to work?" she asked. He thought about it honestly. 2 weeks ago, he said. "Maybe 3. "And now?" He shook his head. The conversation about adoption. Late March. Maris had been building toward this for 2 weeks. She sat down with Elowen in the shelter's small consultation room, a space barely large enough for 2 chairs and a table, and put Riven's folder between them. She did not open it immediately. She looked at Elowen first, with the directness of someone who is about to say a complicated thing and wants to be sure of the ground before she begins. "I want to talk about where this goes from here," she said. Elowen took out her notepad. Maris looked at the folder, then at Elowen. "He trusts you. It has taken 6 weeks and a significant amount of patience on your part, and the result is that we have a cat who, 6 weeks ago, had a laminated warning sign on his door, and who is now approaching the pass-through on his own and allowing physical contact with objects you hand through." She paused. "The next step, if we can get there, is direct contact." Elowen wrote, "He's not ready for that." "Not yet," Maris agreed. "But here is the thing about what you've built. It is specific to you. We cannot replicate it with a different person. We have tried, not directly, but we've watched other volunteers sit near his enclosure, and the change is noticeable. He accepts other people in the space at this point. He doesn't attack. But the quality of what happens with you is different." Elowen was still. Maris opened the folder. "There is an option I want to put on the table. Not today. Not as a decision, as a question." She slid a single sheet across the table. "Has the idea of adopting him occurred to you?" Elowen looked at the sheet. She looked at it for long enough that Maris, who was good at reading the pauses of people who did not use words, began to understand that something more than consideration was happening in the silence. Then Elowen picked up her pen. She wrote, slowly, "There is something you should know first." She turned the notepad so Maris could read it. Then she wrote the next line. "6 years ago, I tried to care for a cat. I was not able to continue. The cat was rehomed. I do not know if I have changed enough from the person who gave up then." Maris read this twice. She looked up. "Can I ask what happened?" she said carefully. Elowen wrote, "After the stroke, I took in a friend's cat while she moved. I thought I could manage it. My energy was not what I expected. I could not give the cat what it needed, and I knew it, and I returned it to my friend after 4 months. I have not tried to have an animal since." Maris sat with this. "The difference," she finally said, "is that what Riven needs is not energy. It is not activity or stimulation or socialization with other animals or anything that requires more than you have available." She paused. "What he needs is exactly what you have been giving him for 6 weeks. Consistency, quiet, the specific quality of your presence. She looked directly at Elowen. "I've been doing this for 18 years. I have never seen a reactive cat respond to a person the way he responds to you. That is not something you learn to manufacture. You either have it or you don't." Elowen looked at the folder. Then, out the small window of the consultation room, where the March light was doing what March light does in Michigan, still thin, still arriving at an angle, but beginning to carry a little more warmth in it than it had last week. She wrote, "I need to think." "Take all the time you need," Maris said. She closed the folder and stood. At the door, she paused. "For what it is worth," she said, "I have watched him watch the corridor for you for 8 days straight when you were in the hospital. That cat does not know how to pretend." She let the statement settle. "Neither, I think, do you?" She left. Elowen sat alone in the consultation room for a few minutes. Outside, a truck pulled into the shelter parking lot. A door banged. Somewhere in the building, an animal, she couldn't tell what kind, made a brief startled sound and then was quiet. She looked at the notepad. She looked at what she had written. "I do not know if I have changed enough." She thought about the months after the stroke, when she had relearned the movements her hands needed to make to produce a usable seam. The first attempts had been uneven, frustrating, nothing like what her hands had known how to do for 20 years. She had made them again and again. The seams had not come back to where they were. They had gone somewhere new, something tighter, more deliberate, more aware of each individual stitch. Changed enough from what, exactly? She closed the notepad. She walked back to Bay 14. Riven was at the door. He had been waiting the whole time. Late March. The home visit. The paperwork took 4 days. Maris had been clear from the beginning that the process would not be abbreviated, even given what had been built between Elowen and Riven over the preceding months. If anything, she had said, the process would be more careful. Not because she doubted Elowen, but because she understood what a failed placement would cost both of them, and she was not willing to move faster than the situation could bear. There was a home assessment. A shelter volunteer named Deb, a retired schoolteacher with the practical eyes of someone who has evaluated many things and is not easily fooled by surfaces, came to Elowen's house on Alderton Street on a Tuesday afternoon and spent 90 minutes walking through it. She looked at the windows and noted, without being asked, that the latches were secure. She looked at the shelves and the height of the furniture and the particular layout of the rooms, the small living room opening into the quilting room, the bedroom beyond, the kitchen at the back with its view of the yard. She walked the yard. She stood at the kitchen window and looked out the way a cat might. Elowen followed her through all of this without performing. She answered questions on her notepad, briefly and accurately, without expanding unless expansion was useful. This was, she had come to understand, the correct approach to processes that needed information. You gave what was needed and trusted the other person to know what to do with it. Deb sat down at the kitchen table with her checklist. She went through it item by item, making marks. Then she set the pen down. "I'm going to be honest with you," Deb said. "I came in here expecting to like this visit. Maris doesn't get excited about placements often. When she does, it usually means something." She looked around the kitchen. "What I didn't expect was how quiet this house is." Elowen waited. "I don't mean empty," Deb said. "There's a difference. This house is quiet the way things are quiet when someone has been paying attention to them for a long time." She looked at the kitchen counter where the folded fabric squares for tomorrow's shelter visit were already stacked, ready. "That cat is going to find this overwhelming at first," she said. "Not because of you, because of what he is. You understand that?" Elowen wrote, "Yes. And you know it might take weeks before he settles." Elowen wrote, "I know." Deb looked at her for a moment. Then she made the final mark on the checklist, closed the folder, and stood. "The house is approved," she said. "The shelving specifications and window modifications are on this sheet." She placed a single page on the table. Nothing major. Some higher perches, an enclosed bed space near the floor, the window in the quilting room needs a secondary latch. She paused. "One more thing. Is there someone who can check in on you both in the first 2 weeks? Someone you trust?" Elowen wrote, "Patrice. Next door. Does Patrice understand cats?" Elowen thought about this. Then she wrote, "Patrice understands me. That is close enough." Deb smiled, the specific smile of someone who has assessed many situations and has found, in this particular one, nothing to worry about. "I'll give my report to Maris by Thursday," she said. "You can expect a call." She let herself out. Elowen sat at the kitchen table alone. The afternoon light was doing something interesting through the kitchen window. The March light in Cedar Hollow had been shifting over the last week, arriving at a slightly higher angle each morning, carrying in it the suggestion that the season had made a decision and was beginning to execute it. The snow in the yard had pulled back from the center, leaving the grass, still flat, still winter brown, exposed in a rough circle near the garden bed. She looked at the page Deb had left: higher shelving, an enclosed bed space, a secondary window latch. She picked up her pen and a fresh piece of paper and began to sketch the quilting room wall, noting measurements. She had work to do. The preparation. First week of April. Patrice Omondi came through the side door on a Saturday morning with a drill in one hand and a bag of hardware in the other, which was not a combination Elowen had been expecting. Patrice was 61, with a laugh that arrived before she did, and a practical capability for home improvement that she had developed over 3 decades of owning a house that was always in the early stages of some project or another. She set the hardware bag on the kitchen table and looked at the wall sketch Elowen had left out. "Shelving," Patrice said. "Good. Remy's old bracket set is in your garage, did you know that? He left it for you when he moved out of his workshop space 3 years ago. We never needed it." Elowen had not known this. Patrice noticed her expression. "You were somewhere else that month," she said, simply and without apology. "The brackets are in the garage. I'll go get them." They spent the morning building shelves in the quilting room. Patrice drilled, Elowen directed with small gestures and the occasional sketch. By noon, they had 3 graduated shelves along the east wall, the highest at 6 feet, solid enough to hold a cat at speed. Patrice drove the final bracket home, blew the dust from the wall, and stepped back to look at it. "Good," she said. She looked at Elowen. "You nervous?" Elowen considered the question seriously. Then she tilted her hand, palm down, fingers slightly spread, a gesture that Patrice had learned over the years to translate as somewhere between yes and no, but leaning toward a specific kind of yes. "That sounds right," Patrice said. "You want coffee?" They drank coffee at the kitchen table. Patrice did not fill the silence with words, which was one of the reasons she was Elowen's closest friend. She had spent 11 years learning the grammar of Elowen's quiet, and she used it with the fluency of someone for whom a second language has become, in certain company, more natural than the first. "I'm going to say one thing," Patrice said, when the coffee was half gone. Elowen waited. "You gave that cat back 6 years ago because you were 8 months out of the hospital and your right hand still wasn't working and you had not slept a full night in 4 months. She set her mug down. "That is not the same as giving up. That is knowing what you could carry." She looked at Elowen steadily. "You are carrying differently now." Elowen looked at her hands around the mug. She wrote on the notepad that was always within reach. He might panic. The first visit might go badly. "It might," Patrice said. "He might hide for days. He might. I might do everything right, and it still might not work." Patrice was quiet for a moment. "Yes," she said. "All of that is true." She picked up her coffee. It was also true for the shelves, and look at them. Elowen looked at the quilting room wall. The shelves were straight and level, and looked like they had always been there. She almost smiled. The first visit, a Wednesday morning. Maris brought Riven in a carrier that smelled already of the quilting fabric. Elowen had placed 2 squares inside it 3 days earlier, left with Maris to put in the enclosure before the transport. Inside the carrier, Riven was entirely silent. No vocalization, no sound of movement. Maris set the carrier on the quilting room floor near the base of the new shelving. She stepped back. She looked at Elowen, who was standing against the far wall, hands loose at her sides, exactly where she had stood when Deb had done the assessment, the position she had calculated in the weeks since as the optimal starting distance for an animal arriving in an unfamiliar space. Calder was there too, which had not been in the original plan, but Maris had brought him because she believed in backup, and because she had watched him change over the last 2 months into someone more capable of stillness than he had been at the start, and because the drive had been 30 minutes, and having a second person for the return trip was practical. He stood in the doorway of the quilting room, as far back as the space allowed, arms folded, making himself as small as his frame permitted. Maris lifted the carrier door. Nothing happened for 40 seconds. Then Riven came out. He did not explode from the carrier. He stepped from it with the braced, deliberate caution of something that has decided to move into an unknown space and is organizing that movement with great care. He was low to the ground. His eyes went immediately to the full circumference of the room, walls, corners, ceiling, floor, in the rapid sequence of an animal doing environmental assessment. He found Elowen. He went still. She did not move. She met his eyes for 2 seconds, looked away, looked back. Riven looked away from her. He looked at the shelving. He looked at the enclosed bed space Elowen had placed near the floor at the base of the east wall, lined with cotton fabric in autumn colors, the same prints he had been seeing for months in the fabric squares. He walked toward the bed space. He stopped in front of it. He pressed his face against the fabric entrance flap. Once, twice. His body was still low, still guarded, but his tail had lifted slightly from its flat against the floor position. He went inside. The room was silent for a full minute. Then a sound, small, the specific sound of an animal settling its weight on a fabric surface and adjusting position. Calder breathed out so slowly and carefully that it was nearly inaudible. Riven stayed inside the bed space for 2 hours. He did not come out while Maris and Calder were present. Elowen sat on the floor near the quilting table, not near the bed space, not approaching it, and worked on her quilting. The small familiar sounds moved through the room. Maris sat on the chair she had brought in from the kitchen. Calder remained in the doorway. Nobody spoke. After 2 hours, Maris looked at her watch, then at Elowen, and made a small question with her eyebrows. Elowen wrote on her notepad and held it up. "Go. I'll text you tonight." Maris looked at the bed space, which was still quiet. She looked at Elowen. She nodded. They left. The first night, Riven stayed in the bed space until approximately 9 o'clock, when Elowen, in the kitchen making the simple dinner she always made on Wednesdays, soup from a can, bread, a cup of tea she drank while looking out the window at the yard, heard the soft sound of fabric moving. She did not go to the quilting room. She stayed in the kitchen. The sound continued, a quiet exploration, the careful sound of paws on a hardwood floor. She heard him reach the kitchen doorway. She could tell by the shift in the air quality of the sound, the slight change in resonance when he reached the uncarpeted floor. She did not turn around. She kept her eyes on the yard, where the last of the March snow had receded almost completely now, leaving only a thin ridge along the fence where the sun had not quite reached. The garden bed was visible, the dark earth beginning to show the first tentative expressions of what would be there in 6 weeks. She heard him cross the kitchen. She heard him stop. She did not turn. She drank her tea. After 4 minutes, she heard him begin to move again, not away, but around. A slow circuit of the kitchen perimeter, close to the walls, methodical. He reached the far side of the kitchen table. She could feel, in the particular way that people who have learned to feel rather than look develop over time, that he had stopped near her chair. She looked at her cup. He stayed there for a while. Eventually, she heard him move toward the bed she had set up for him in the corner near the radiator, a low, open basket lined with more of the familiar fabric, and settle. The quiet that followed was a different quality of quiet than it had been before. The house had a second breathing thing in it. She had not realized until that moment how completely she had forgotten what that felt like. She washed her cup. She turned off the kitchen light. She walked through the quilting room. The bed space near the shelving was empty and deflated, and into her bedroom, where she got ready for bed in the unhurried way she always did. She did not check on him. She lay in the dark and listened to the house settle, and after a while, she was not sure exactly when, because sleep came before she could track the moment, she heard the specific small sound of a cat jumping up onto a low surface. The radiator basket. She closed her eyes. The days that followed, April, slow and imperfect. He knocked a ceramic pot off the quilting room windowsill on the second day. It broke. He spent the third day entirely inside the bed space, coming out only at night, which Elowen tracked not through watching, but through the position of objects in the morning. A displaced fabric square, the water level in his bowl, the small impressions in the radiator basket that told her he had been there. On the fourth day, he appeared in the quilting room doorway while she was working and stood there for 11 minutes. She did not look up for the first 9. When she finally glanced over, he was gone. On the fifth day, he sat at the far end of the quilting room and watched her work for 40 minutes without moving. She made the same sounds she had always made. The scissors, the thread, the fabric. Calder called on the 6th day. She did not pick up. Her phone was on the table and she was working, and she had a policy about this, but she texted back later in the evening, "He is here. He is doing what he does." Calder wrote back, "Witches." She thought about how to describe it. Then, learning the shape of the place. A pause. Then Calder, "Does that take a while?" She wrote, "As long as it takes." Another pause, longer this time. Then, "I feel like that applies to more than the cat." She did not reply to this, but she read it twice and set the phone face down on the table and looked at the quilting room doorway, where the light from the hallway made a warm rectangle on the floor. She picked the phone back up. She wrote, "Yes, I think it does." The 10th day. The window. She had set up a window perch in the quilting room, a padded shelf attached to the sill of the east-facing window where the morning light came in first and the view of the side yard gave onto the cedar tree at the property line and beyond it the roof line of Patrice's house. She had not made any effort to direct Riven toward it. She had simply placed it there as she had placed everything else, available, not required. On the 10th morning, she came into the quilting room and found him on the perch. He was sitting in the posture she had first seen him adopt at the door of the shelter enclosure, weight settled, tail down, eyes forward. He was watching the cedar tree, where 2 juncos were doing something complicated in the lower branches. She sat at her quilting table. He did not look at her. The juncos finished their transaction and flew off. A sparrow arrived. Then 2 more. Riven's tail moved, once slowly. She made the first stitches of the morning. The sounds of the work moved through the room. The light moved across the floor in its slow, unhurried arc. He stayed on the perch. This was, she thought without sentimentality, a good morning. Calder's visit, mid-April, he had asked. She had written, "Give it 2 weeks." At 2 weeks, she wrote, "All right." He arrived on a Saturday, on foot, which was a 15-minute walk from his apartment on the other side of Cedar Hollow. He brought a small bag of the specific kibble Riven had been eating at the shelter because Elowen had already transitioned him successfully, but Calder hadn't known this when he bought it. He stood on the front step, holding the bag with the expression of someone who has just recognized that his offering is unnecessary. She took the bag from him anyway, with the small gesture that meant it was a good thought. He came inside. He stood in the front room and looked around at the house, the quilting frames on the wall, the stacks of fabric organized by color along one shelf, the sewing machine on its table near the window, and Elowen watched him take it in with the particular attention of someone seeing a space that tells them more than they expected about the person who lives in it. "It's very like you," Calder said, which was not what she had expected him to say. She wrote, "How do you mean?" He thought about it, ordered, but not rigid. Everything has a place, but the places are chosen for how things work, not for how they look. He paused. "That's the same thing you did with Riven. You found where he worked." She looked at him. He was not, she had concluded over the last several months, as incapable of stillness as she had originally assessed. He had arrived at the shelter 3 months ago with the energy of someone running toward competence, and he had been checked by the enclosure in Bay 14 in a way that had, apparently, landed. He was different now, quieter, not subdued, different. The energy was still there, but he had learned to hold it differently, to let it collect in the stillness rather than release it through movement. Riven appeared in the quilting room doorway. He saw Calder. His body went into the low, watchful mode she recognized, not the compressed readiness of Bay 14, but the careful assessment posture that meant he was gathering information before deciding. Calder saw him. He did exactly the right thing, which was to look at a point on the floor slightly to the side of Riven, not meeting his eyes, and then turn his attention back to Elowen. "He looks good," Calder said very quietly to her. Riven stayed in the doorway for 3 minutes. Then he walked to the window perch, past Calder at a distance of about 4 feet, and jumped up. He turned around once. He sat facing the yard. Calder let out a long, slow breath. Elowen wrote on her notepad and held it up so Calder could read it. That is the most he has tolerated a new person since leaving the shelter. Calder read it. He looked at Riven on the perch. He looked back at Elowen. He watched the door every day for you, he said. Those 8 days you were in the hospital. I was doing the morning shift. He was always facing the corridor when I came in. She looked at the perch. Riven was watching something in the yard, a bird or a movement along the fence line. She wrote, I know. How do you know? You weren't there. She wrote, because I knew he would. Calder was quiet for a moment. Then, with the honesty of someone still learning how to have the right conversation at the right time, is that why you said yes to the adoption? She considered this for a long time. Long enough that Calder waited without prompting, which she noted and appreciated. Then she wrote, partly, and partly because Maris said he does not know how to pretend. And I thought, she paused, wrote slowly, that neither do I. And that might be enough of a language between us. Calder read this twice. He did not say anything for a moment. Outside, the April wind moved through the cedar tree, and its shadow shifted across the quilting room floor, and Riven's head tracked the movement with the automatic interest of a creature for whom the world has begun to be genuinely interesting again. I think, Calder said finally, that I learned the wrong thing from what happened at the enclosure. She raised her eyebrows. I thought I learned that I moved too fast, that I needed to be stiller. He paused. But watching you these last months, I think what I actually needed to learn was different. It wasn't about the speed. He looked at Riven. It was about the reason for the stillness. You weren't still because you were being careful. You were still because you were actually listening. He stopped. That's not the same thing. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she wrote, no, it is not. The afternoon in late April, what Patrice saw. She had been right that Patrice would see things she should not have been able to see from next door. And Patrice confirmed this without apology on a Thursday when she came through the side gate with a container of the sweet potato casserole she made every spring when the sweet potatoes from the farmer's market were back. She set it on the kitchen table and looked through the quilting room doorway without being invited to. Riven was on the window perch. He was at the end, nearest the wall, not the end with the best view of the yard, but the end that was closest to the quilting table where Elowen sat working. Patrice said. Elowen looked up. Patrice sat down at the kitchen table. He moved, she said. The perch. He used to sit at the far end. Now he sits at the near end. She looked at Elowen. When did that start? Elowen thought about it. She wrote, 8 days ago, maybe 9. After Calder's visit? She thought again. 2 days after. Patrice nodded, as if this confirmed something. He's orienting toward you, she said. Not to the yard. To you. The yard is secondary now. Elowen looked at the perch. Riven had not moved during this conversation. He was watching something outside with his customary focused stillness, his tail in the slow arc that meant he was settled. She wrote, he still watches the yard. Of course he does. He's a cat. Patrice pulled the casserole container toward her to open the lid and check the top, which she always did regardless of whose kitchen she was in. But the yard is where it's interesting. You're where it's safe. She replaced the lid. Those are 2 different things, and he's keeping them in 2 different places. The interesting thing out there and the safe thing in here. She looked at Elowen. You've become the inside wall. Elowen sat with this, the inside wall, the structural thing. The one you don't notice because it has simply always been there, doing what it does without requiring acknowledgement. She thought about what Maris had said weeks ago. That cat does not know how to pretend. She thought about the 8 days in the hospital and Calder's morning shifts and the image she had built from his words, Riven at the back of the enclosure, facing the corridor, watching for something that was not there yet. She wrote slowly. He waited. He did, Patrice said. I waited too. She looked at what she had written. Then she added, I just did not know that was what I was doing. Patrice was quiet for a moment. Then she reached across the table and put her hand briefly over Elowen's, the way she had been doing for 11 years, without ceremony, without explanation, just the warm fact of it. Then she stood and went to look in the cupboard for 2 plates, because the casserole was not going to serve itself, and that was simply how things were done. An ordinary evening, the last week of April. The light in Cedar Hollow in late April has a quality that belongs only to that specific latitude and that specific season, the long horizontal light of a northern evening, coming in low through the windows and laying itself in warm planks across the floors. It comes in from the west and catches the dust on the quilting frames and makes the fabric colors glow like something lit from inside. It does not last long, but while it is there, it has the quality of something that has been promised and has now arrived, unhurried and complete. Elowen was at the quilting table. The autumn color block was finished. She was starting something new, a different pattern, lighter colors, the blue and cream of early spring. Her hands moved with the precise rhythm she had rebuilt, stitch by stitch, over 11 years of learning what her hands could still be. The room was quiet. The clock on the wall said 6:40. Outside, the birds had started the particular late-day argument that birds in Michigan have every spring evening. Not alarm, just announcement. Here, still here. She heard the sound before she registered it, a soft weight landing on the edge of the quilting table. She looked up. Riven was on the table, not on the fabric, on the narrow strip of wood at the table's near edge, between her and the work. He had landed there, 4 paws arranged with the meticulous precision of a cat who has decided to occupy a specific square of space and intends to do so correctly. He looked at her. She looked at him. He was 18 inches from her face, close enough that she could see the individual markings of the tabby pattern across his forehead, the specific amber of his eyes in the late light, the slight unevenness at the tip of one ear where something old had happened and healed. She did not move. He looked at her for a long moment. Then very slowly he blinked, both eyes all the way closed, all the way open. She blinked back, slowly, deliberately. He looked out the window. She looked at her work. After a minute, he folded his front paws beneath him and settled his weight. He was not touching her. He was not asking anything. He was simply on the table, at the edge of her work, in the specific proximity that means here. This is where I am. The light moved across the floor. The birds outside made their evening argument. She made the next stitch. What Calder saw, a morning in May. He came to return the kibble bag, the wrong kind, which she had eventually told him she would use as a supplement, which was not true but was the kind thing, and knocked at the front door at 9:15 on a Saturday. She opened the door. He started to say something. Then he stopped. Over her shoulder, through the open door of the quilting room, Riven was visible on the window perch. He was sitting in his morning position, facing the yard, watching the birds in the cedar tree, his tail hanging loosely over the perch's edge. Every morning at 9 o'clock. That was what Elowen had told him in a text the week before. Every morning at 9 o'clock he is on the perch. I do not know if this is about the birds or about the light, but it is always 9. It was 9:15. Riven was there. He was not tense. He was not watchful in the way he had been watchful at the shelter, the full-body readiness, the ears tracking every sound for threat assessment. He was watchful the way something is watchful when it has claimed a territory and finds the territory interesting. Calder stood in the doorway and looked at the cat on the perch. The late morning light caught the amber of his eyes from across the room. He was not looking at the door. He was watching the cedar tree. Something moved in the branches, a junco probably, given the season, and Riven's tail moved once in the slow lateral arc that Elowen had told him meant settled. Not alert, not hunting, just here. Calder looked at Elowen. She looked back at him with the expression that he had learned over the months was her version of, yes, I know. He handed her the kibble bag. She took it without moving from the door. They both looked at the cat on the perch, watching the tree. Calder said quietly, "He's not waiting anymore, is he?" It was not quite a question. She shook her head. What is he doing instead? She thought about it. Then she wrote on the notepad she had brought with her to the door out of habit, "Staying." Calder read it. He nodded slowly, the way people nod when they have understood something that they know they will be thinking about for a while. He said goodbye. She closed the door. Behind her, in the quilting room, Riven's tail moved again. Once, twice. The slow, unhurried arc of something completely at ease in the place where it is. The cedar tree shifted in the May wind. He watched it. He was not going anywhere.